Trade unions are now required to conduct a secret ballot amongst their members before going on strike. This is according to new guidelines by the Department of Labour. The legislation took effect on January the 1st, and the recent deadline passed for unions to amend their constitutions to this effect. Now, the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, and its affiliates opposes this policy, saying it will deprive workers of their constitutional right to strike. For more on this, I'm joined now by Nomahlube Ngune, acting SAFTU spokesperson. Nomahlube, it's good to have you.
Thank you. According
to Makosonke Bdeli, is the acting spokesperson at the Department of Labour and Employment, he issued this statement saying the guidelines on balloting for strikes or lockouts issued in terms of Section 59 of the Labour Relations Act relate to the very trade union or employers organization must be calling a strike or lockout conduct a ballot of members in respect of whom it intends to call the strike or lockout. This is a system of voting member rights in regards to failure and refusal to participate, permit in regard to balloting unless stipulated a requirement for a trade union to obtain. Now, basically what they're saying is before you strike, you got to get consent from all employees that they want to be a part of that strike. Why is that such a big thing?
If you look at organizations that have so many workers under as their constituency, that's a form of a Stalingrad tactic that is meant to exhaust the pace with which trade unions are able to mobilize for a strike. Because if you look at people working in garages, that means you have to go through every single one of those employees and get their consent before you embark on a strike. And that is a constitutional infringement on how on trade unions' ability to organize a strike and to associate. And balloting is not a new thing, but in the past, how we've done it, you could do it electronically, you could do it through AGMs, but now it's adding this extra measure, which is really meant to fatigue trade unions.
So Labour Registrar saying he's been holding meetings with various labour organizations and employer organizations to try and help them through this particular process of how the balloting should actually be done. So just explain to me in real terms, what does it mean? Because I hear you saying it's going to be cumbersome and sometimes nearly impossible to reach all the employers. What is really required? Can't you send an email? Can't they send an SMS? This cannot be done via those means.
So that's where it becomes very tricky, because in the trade union it just says you require the majority, and it's not clear in terms of stipulating how you get that measure and what that is. So that's some of the problematic issues with this registrar. But also to just put it into context of how we got here, this was a long negotiated settlement between COSATU, FEDUSA and NACTU and the business owners when they were negotiating the minimum wage of 20 Rand per hour. And this was one of the trade-offs they had to give, which is to allow this secret ballot to happen. And that is mainly the only consequence it has. It's just to fatigue trade unions and to add an administrative burden. Because let's get this right. If the previous legislation was not a problem, why change something that has been working?
Yeah. This, of course, is a clause that was added later on, because in 2016, COSATU had said that they are against this particular clause being added to the Act. What changed between that opposition of this particular clause in 2016 and what we saw then happen at NEDLEC and them reaching some kind of an understanding on this?
It's purely a betrayal of the working class. It's a betrayal of the working class, where you've had COSATU, who's continuously in bed with the ruling party, and some of the business owners constantly adopting policies that are continuously infringing on independent trade unions like SAFTU. And unfortunately, we are not even part of some of those negotiations that happened at NEDLEC.
All right. Of course, it has now been opened that all labour movements, including yourself, can actually be a part of NEDLEC because the minister has somewhat changed that constitution to say it's not the guys who are in that will determine who can actually come into this space. But let's talk about the backdrop. 29% unemployment rate, if that's what you're going with. it's a little bit higher if you're going for the broad definition. Mass job losses currently, retrenchments left, right, and center in all sectors, quite honestly. And then you've got these endless strikes that at some point are driven by intimidation. Wouldn't you say such a legislation would help in that environment to bring about what they call labor market stability?
If you look at those conditions alone, those are already intimidating the worker from already embarking on a strike. And now to add this legislation that says you must get consent from each of the members whether they want to go on strike, if anything, it poses a further hindrance from workers from using and exercising their only tool they have for disputing wage disputes with their employees and other working conditions.
But what I'm saying to you is that what we do know is that when these labor strikes go on, there is intimidation that does occur. What does SAF to say to speak to the issue of intimidation?
Even through a secret ballot paper, it's not quite clear how it will prevent those intimidations from happening. So SAFTU is saying on the basis of even preventing us from getting and organizing a strike, that is where our main dispute is. And it's not clear how by embarking on a secret ballot paper, you are actually protecting those intimidations from happening, because one could argue they could still happen and people could still be intimidated to embark and sign on those secret ballots.
In terms of responsibility and accountability, what this amendment does, to an extent, it puts that responsibility on the unions, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because it's the union members that have to now go to the workers and conduct and get all of that consensus, previously it could be done in AGM meetings, and it could be done through other channels, open channels of balloting, and we already have those processes in place, and now we have to undo it and factor this, all of the secret balloting processes in our process.
But also in terms of the strikes going wrong, then the labor movements are going to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And that's something that you would be against?
No, we wouldn't be against being held accountable, because for every single strike that we embark on, we make sure that we have consented with our workers and we take responsibility for them.
So what's the reason why workers should be alarmed by this? Because if you look at what is happening right now within the working space, unions don't have as many numbers as they used to have. A large number of those who are working actually are not unionized, and therefore would not directly be affected by the things that you as unions would be affected by. So why should they be alarmed about this particular legislation?
They should be alarmed because already not having that unity in voice which trade unions bring to organizations, and now you have this legislation that potentially diminishes our ability to organize and to form a strike and speak in one voice, and that should be very alarming because it's diminishing the power of the working class further and further.
All right, Noma Hlubi, much appreciated. Thanks for joining us today. That is Noma Hlubi, acting spokesperson for SAFTU. This, of course, following now a statement coming from the Department of Labor that it will be compulsory for the labor movements to actually hold secret ballots with the employees to determine if indeed they are all in agreement with the strike going ahead. This, of course, is a process that was in effect negotiated and effected at NEDLEC, and some of those labor movements, including SAFTU, saying we were left outside of that particular process. And I believe AMCU as well, one of those unions who are saying we were left outside of this process. From the statement from SAFTU, they're saying they will continue then to fight against this. In fact, they are going to go all the way up to the Constitutional Court to fight for the right